Hi there, I'm Tom Field, Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. I want to welcome you to today's session entitled Leverage AI to Protect Against Phishing and Typosquatting Attacks. Your presenter today is Shashi Prakash. He's the co-founder and CTO of Bolster. Now, before I turn this over to Shashi, let me give you a little bit of background about what he's going to talk about today. How do you protect your customers and employees from rampant phishing and typosquatting attacks that pop up now every day? Criminals are banking on the fact that you can't find every single one to block them or warn customers and employees about every new attack. Bolster protects against phishing and typosquatting scams by leveraging the power of AI and automation to fight scale with scale. AI that combines deep learning, computer vision, and natural language processing to identify criminal intent is far more accurate than automatically taking these sites down. In this session today, Shashi is going to offer an in-depth discussion into the cutting-edge technologies that can help companies achieve proactive cyber defense, which eliminates these threats before they do damage, rather than waiting for an attack and defending against it. Let me take just a moment to tell you about my organization, Information Security Media Group. We are a global education and intelligence firm. You might know us best by one of our 30-plus international media sites. These include Bank Info Security, Data Breach Today, and the three we started most recently dedicated to fraud, payment security, and device security. Every one of our sites is dedicated to providing education and news regarding information security, but specifically tailored to their individual sectors. With over 950,000 members registered to our sites, we've created a true information source that tackles the key issues of interest to our unique audience. A few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Shashi during the course of this session, you can submit them anytime by the chat window you see on your screen. If any of you should experience technical issues, please dial the number on your screen now. If you dial extension 115, we do have technical support staff standing by to help. Also, I do need to emphasize, the content being presented today is copyrighted material. As such, it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you or your organization would like to use any of the information presented today, or if you're looking for customized training materials, please contact us. Let's take a moment to introduce Bolster. Bolster is the industry leader in real-time detection and removal of online fraud and risk. It was founded on the vision that security must operate at internet scale and leverage the power of artificial intelligence and automation to achieve that objective. Despite ever-increasing security budgets, millions of fraudulent websites are created every year, leading to billions in losses, and this trend shows no signs of abating. Bolster helps companies identify and eliminate online threats and risk in real time to protect their customers, employees, and their brands. To learn more, please visit bolster.ai. And now let's meet Shashi Prakash. Again, he's the co-founder and CTO at Bolster, where he's led the engineering and research effort since its inception. He's got more than a decade of experience working at the intersection of cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Prior to Bolster, he was senior security researcher at Cisco, where he developed machine learning algorithms to catch billions of spam messages. With that, let me turn you over now to Shashi Prakash. Shashi, the show is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Shashi Prakash. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Bolster. Today, I'm going to talk about how this problem of phishing and typosquatting has evolved into a problem of scale in the last few years, and how this problem can be solved in the most effective way using the help of AI. So we'll go into the details of how we're solving it with the help of AI. If we talk about phishing, it's a problem that has been there since the inception of internet, and even today it's a very prevalent problem, and it's in more than 90% of attacks we see, phishing is involved. If you look at this site, there is a copycat Wells Fargo site on the right. You can see it looks kind of similar to wellsfargo.com, but the only difference is the L's have been replaced with one. The content of the site is very high quality. It's an almost exact copy of Wells Fargo, so it's very effective in the way of infringing on Wells Fargo, and also people fall for these kinds of attacks because they look very similar to the original site. Now, if you look at this problem, it's not just a phishing issue here. The websites like these can result in other kinds of attacks. We've seen, for example, monetary theft happening, which is quite obvious. If someone got your banking credentials, they will get away with the money. But other than that, it can also lead to malware distribution, drive-by download attacks, where someone can, if you launch this site in your browser, it can download malware without you even doing anything. Obviously, it leads to credential theft, where your username and password is stolen, and that can lead to other compromises on other sites, because people end up, using the same username and password on multiple services. And then account takeover, where someone has taken over the account of the user, and once they are in the system of the original site, they can actually do other kinds of attacks based on, now they have escalated privileges, and they can do other kinds of attacks on these sites. And then typosquatting attack is a very prevalent problem. It has grown rapidly in the last couple of years because of, now there are so many top-level domains, newer domains, similar to .com, .net, .org. There are now like thousands of top-level domains which can be used to create other kinds of domains, which are lookalikes of the original site. So if you look at this problem, traditionally all of these attacks in a typical organization fall into different groups. Security is different, which handles some of these attacks. Whereas some other ones are handled by groups which are more in trust and safety, for example, or even legal teams. So it makes sense for an organization to look at this holistically and think about having a uniform method of solving these problems at both internal level and external level. So we know that these sites are external, but they can easily cause problems in internal security. So why not have a holistic view of this problem and solve it both internally and externally? And then if we look at the typosquatting problem in particular, like I mentioned, it's a problem of scale. So we have 1,600 top-level domains in addition to the popular ones, like .com, .org. There are so many new ones coming up. There are CCTLDs, country-level TLDs, for example. And with these TLDs, what happens is the surface of attack has grown quite a bit. So someone who would be able to register a lookalike domain in a popular TLD can now have any of these 1,600 TLDs and combine their domains and create a list of multiple domains. To give you some numbers here, like a 6 character in a domain can lead to 12,000 different combinations because of these TLDs, right? A 7 character domain similarly can lead to 15,000, and if you go on and up to 10 characters in a domain, it can lead to 25,000 possible combinations. And there is a cost element to this, right? Traditionally, when the number of top-level domains were small, there would be companies doing proactive registration of these sites to prevent bad actors from registering them, and that's called defensive registration. And it's effective if the number of domains are small, but if you see these numbers, and if there's an estimate of $10 per domain, defensive registration does not scale. It can lead to extremely high costs, from 120,000 for a 6-letter domain to even $250,000 for a 10-letter domain. So that approach does not scale anymore with the latest advancements and latest new TLDs that are coming up. This will continue to grow. And talking about security, which is sitting at the center of this all, because like I mentioned, the attacks can happen externally, but they affect different organizations within a company. There could be legal and compliance, which wants to take down the site from a customer infringement perspective, whereas there could be customer support, which is dealing with any users who've already been compromised, and they're reaching out to the customer support of, let's say, a bank. And similarly, there are other organizations within a company which can also be affected. But InfoSec is sitting at the center of this all, right? There are a couple of examples where I can show how InfoSec really has to take some proactive measures and even reactive measures after the compromises happen. So one example would be account takeover, right? So someone lost their credentials on a phishing site of a bank, let's say. So once that attack has happened, the onus falls on the InfoSec team to reset their password, and because they have the IAM credentials, and they have to reset the password and let the user know that they've been compromised and go through that workflow. So it falls again in the InfoSec domain, even though it may come through customer support. Similarly, there could be a Typosquatting domain where someone has registered a similar or lookalike kind of a domain, and they're sending emails through that domain for doing a business email compromise kind of a scam through emails. And in those cases, again, even though there could be financial loss, a lot of organizations actually end up losing money because they end up sending money through wire transfers and things like that. But at the end of the day, it falls again on InfoSec, because they have to stop these attacks from getting through the email gateways. So if we look at these attacks, even though they are separate and coming through different vectors, InfoSec is the place where it needs to all of this needs to collate, and we need to basically figure out a way where we deal with these attacks comprehensively in one platform rather than solving them in multiple different silos. And that's what we've been seeing. The trend has changed over the last few years. Now InfoSec does fall into various different parts of the organization and helps in many organizations to solve this problem in a more holistic way. If we talk about the mitigation of these attacks, what are the best options that any organization may have? So let's go back to the phishing example of Wells Fargo. If you look at this one, there are different things that an organization can do to stop these attacks. One is obviously very straightforward, blacklisting this URL across multiple blacklists. There are several global blacklists where you can put this domain, and all the security vendors and browsers will consume that information and block it across multiple security products. They can block, for example, on your browser through Chrome, or they could block on antivirus products that you might be using. That's one way. There could be another way where we block it at the email layer, because email is still the #1 attack vector, and you could block the domain on the email layer. Then companies who find these types of phishing sites proactively also warn their customers, even though the customer may not have seen the sites. It's good to proactively warn them that there's something going on, and this site is out there which is phishing users, so users should be aware of it. And then even before the attack happens, there is another option where the companies could acquire this domain, like I mentioned, through defensive registration, even before the hackers can get their hands on these domains. And the last one is we take down the site after we found initially that it's hosting phishing. Out of these, the most effective way in today's world, we think, is the takedown of the site, because if we can find the attack in the very early stages of its inception, and how quickly you can find, detect, and also take down the site would be the most effective measure, because that scales really well if you can detect it at scale. All the other methods have limitations, either they're reactive or if you want to acquire the domain proactively, that does not scale. Like I mentioned, the cost element of it is it makes it intractable. We cannot really acquire all the domains that are out there. So if we think about the takedown process, what does it mean to take down a site, right? We know that it is an effective method to mitigate the attack, but what does it mean to take down a site? Traditionally, the legacy providers, how they've dealt with this is basically, it has been a fairly manual process. So you get the site, right? You discover it first, and discovery part is also quite manual. You'll have to go through the site, and there will be a human analyst who would review the content of the site and make a decision that, okay, this looks like Wells Fargo or any other popular brand, and it's a phishing site. And once they detect it, you report it to anti-phishing companies, which basically either will blacklist across different browsers or antivirus products, or there is a way to also issue takedowns. So now the takedown part would involve finding out the infrastructure where it's hosted, which would involve looking up the whois information, the abuse contacts, their email addresses, where is it hosted, registrar, registry, so on and so forth. And then we reach out to them and provide evidence of the site being malicious and in the form of screenshots and other things, and submit a request to take it down. Even after takedown, it's very simple these days to actually move infrastructure. So the hackers will move on from one cloud provider to another, for example, and the site will come back up again. So you also need to monitor after takedown to make sure the site stays down. And then if there is a persistent problem, and we know that some of these hosting providers are not very cooperative, then we also need to involve legal counsel in those cases and go after them through legal means and other means. So it's a fairly involved and manual process. It has been like that. And so if you can imagine, it takes 1 to 12 weeks in some cases if you do it manually. And if you had to do this over and over again for hundreds of sites, if you're a popular brand, you can see hundreds of attacks per week. So how do you do this, right? And then it becomes a problem of how do you scale this thing? And with older technologies, it's very hard to do this beyond a certain point, and it's just not possible to do it manually after a point. So that's where we've designed our system from ground up to deal with this problem of scale, and we use artificial intelligence, and we think that's the way to go to solve this problem at scale, because it's not really possible to solve this with manual efforts. Some numbers to share here. The way we've built this system, we actually detect the sites also automatically at scale. And I'll go into the details of how we're doing it with the help of AI, but we can, from hundreds of sites, we can actually detect thousands of phishing sites every day. We can scan proactively millions of links every day. So that's the kind of scale we're talking. And when it comes down to takedown, we've also automated that process. So within 60 seconds, there is some kind of response we will send to hosting providers from detection. The detection also is fairly fast. Within a second, we can detect, and then within 60 seconds, there is a response for the hosting provider. And if it's an API-based takedown, we actually take the site down within 2 minutes. So we're looking from 1 to 12 weeks for mitigation of these sites to within 3 minutes in some cases. In most cases with APIs, in 3 minutes, we can on an average take down a site. And you see the result of that, right? There's 95% of these sites we take down without any manual intervention, because we've automated their entire workflow and added a lot of improvements on top of it to make it much faster. And we also submitted global blacklists within 6.5 seconds. And after takedown, we also monitor these sites after takedown to make sure they stay down. And that monitoring can also be done 24/7 because, again, it's fully automated. To give you an example of one of the customers of our Zoom, we started working with Zoom in the beginning of 2020, around March, April. And at the time, as you know, the usage of Zoom grew quite exponentially because a lot of people, because of the pandemic, working from home, and a lot of new types of users starting to use Zoom, for example, schools and children and things like that. So they saw an explosive growth in their user base, and as a result of that, bad actors also started targeting Zoom quite rapidly, and it happened very, very quickly within a month or so in the beginning of 2020. So within the first 24 hours of working with Zoom, we actually found close to 1,500 fraudulent sites, which are different kinds of scams targeting Zoom. And we took down 99% of them within the same 24 hours because of the automation we've built around this. And in addition to that, we also found 14,000 sites which were not really hosting anything particularly bad, but they were very suspicious. So we can monitor those continuously, even before they start hosting anything bad. And also, if you look at the distribution of these sites, it goes across 28 different hosting providers in 7 different countries. So if you're working on takedown of these sites manually, first of all, it's not scalable with 1,400 sites, and also working with different hosting providers to take them down is also a fairly manual and tedious process. So we've automated that part as well. So as a result of that, we were able to achieve this kind of takedown within 24 hours. And there are a lot of vendors out there who say, the different kinds of AI everybody is saying they use, but it's not all equal, right? There's difference in how you approach this problem from the perspective of artificial intelligence. So we've developed a very unique approach to look at websites just like you and I would look at it, like just like humans would, and identify artifacts on the site based on the visual and textual content of the site, and then combine that with our proprietary threat intelligence data that we've collected over the last 4 years to make very, very highly accurate determination of the brand and also the type of infringement on this site. So going a little bit deeper into that, so one element of that is the computer vision part, which does very fast image matching between a known template. For example, there is a Wells Fargo template I showed you in the beginning. There could be other templates like that being used for a popular brand. So you can do a very fast image matching to say, okay, this screenshot of the site looks very similar to a known brand. That's one really fast algorithm we built. Then there's a deep learning part, which looks at the objects on the site, like logos or trademarks or other artifacts, like if there are sign-in forms. And that way it can know that, there's a Wells Fargo logo on the page and there's sign-in form. And therefore, it looks like it's trying to ask users to log in with credentials. And then there's a natural language processing component, which understands the intent of the site based on the language. And that can be pretty nuanced. So if you think about it, language, the intent is critical here, right? So a site asking for a username and password is very different intent compared to, let's say, a news article about a brand, maybe talking about the stock prices, right? So understanding the differences between these two is important and critical to accurately detect what kind of threat it is. So that's where we've also pioneered a system which can understand the intent and classify it as a sign-in form kind of a page versus something else which is benign. And then we combine all of these with our proprietary threat intelligence data, which we've gathered. It's in a graph format, and it's has over 10 billion nodes, and it gives us basically tells us about the infrastructure where it's hosted, and if there's any history on the infrastructure and other critical pieces of threat intelligence that we use to make a determination of the site. I'll give you a concrete example with one of the phishing sites that was detected by our system. So if you look at this, the first piece of information is at the top, which is the URL. And this is actually a compromised website of a small to medium business. And there are certain techniques which would not work here. So this is not a new registered domain. This has been up for a while, and it's a legitimate business, but they happen to be compromised, and maybe through some plugins or the software that they're using on the website, they got compromised and someone started posting Apple phishing on it, right? So traditional methods of looking at newly registered domains and things like that would not work here. So how would our system identify this? It would actually look at the content, like I just mentioned. It would look at things like, are there logos on the site? And we did detect Apple logos on there using computer vision and deep learning. And then the NLP part of the model, which will understand what is it saying. It's asking to sign into iTunes account, and it's asking for Apple ID and password. So that is the kind of intent we can combine with the threat intelligence data we've gathered to identify this as a phishing site. And all of this processing from once the screenshot and the content is available, the processing on the machine learning models takes less than 100 milliseconds. So all of this verdict we can generate in less than 100 milliseconds after we got the content. And you can imagine, so from the point where we detected that this site is Apple phishing, we can immediately start the mitigation if Apple were a customer, right? And that's how we also have reduced the time from several weeks to within a matter of minutes to take down a particular site. Our fraud and risk platform has, like I mentioned, multiple components. At the bottom, the NLP, the logo detection, computer vision, deep learning, and the graph. This powers our platform, and this platform has multiple applications, not just phishing. As you can imagine, because we are into identifying the content of the site, we can actually identify other forms of abuse, like if someone is, for example, posting hate speech or racism, that falls into our content moderation category. Then we do brand protection, fraud prevention, typosquatting we already discussed, and if there are fake app stores which are selling unauthorized versions of the app, and sometimes these apps are basically injected with malicious code, and they're put on these other unauthorized app stores. And if someone downloads your app from these third-party app stores, then they get compromised, and their whole device can get compromised. So that's another very critical piece of monitoring which is required these days. And then there's domain monitoring, and then all of this is available through APIs. So there are detection APIs that we provide that very easy to integrate. Again, it's a REST-based API. Anybody could just start scanning with the content they want to scan. It could be a link, it could be text, it could be other forms of content, and you'll be able to tell them what's going on with it. So in this slide, I'm going to briefly explain our entire platform in action. So if you look at this, this is the main dashboard of our platform. On the top, you see these different numbers. So we've summarized on this dashboard the data we found for Apple as a brand. So we've been monitoring Apple, even though Apple is not our customer. All of this is public data because these are like phishing links and scam links that are on the internet. So there's nothing proprietary here. But we can talk about how we are detecting these sites and what is the information we're gathering and summarizing on the dashboard. So on the first part here is on the left, you see this 90.5 million number. That's basically all the sites we've monitored over a period of time. In this case, that's 90 days. So we're on average monitoring 1 million sites per day, out of which on the right, the blue part you see is the number specific to Apple. So we found in those 90 days, for example, over 4,000 phishing sites. There are about 10,000 suspicious sites, which you can see it says URLs with Apple. That means they are suspicious sites which have Apple in some form or the other in the domain, even though they may not be hosting anything bad, like they may not have phishing content, but we proactively monitor these sites to make sure they don't start hosting anything bad in the future. And then you see the typosquatting URLs, which is basically we discussed earlier, where someone is registering a similar lookalike kind of domain as Apple, and maybe they could be used in future for other types of attacks. In addition to that, we also monitor Google and Bing search results. So a very popular technique of, again, perpetrating these malicious links is through search results. So people will buy, hackers will buy AdWords on, for example, Google, popular AdWords that people want to search for, right? And if they buy those keywords, their malicious site will show up on the ad on the search results, or it may show up in one of the search results as well through some SEO hacks and things like that. So we monitor these search results to make sure the popular keywords do not display scam sites or phishing sites in these search results. So that's another way of protecting the brand. And on this chart, you're seeing like a very simple timeline of what's happened in the last 90 days, what's the trend looking like, how many sites we've found. In this case, we're not doing any takedowns, but there are certain sites which all automatically went down through other means. So we're showing the numbers around how many sites were live versus how many are down. And on the bottom, you see number 5 here, we're showing the disposition, like what did we find there? Was it a phishing site, which means it had active phishing content in there? versus if there was a suspicious site, which kind of had suspicious pattern in the URL, but not really hosting anything bad. So in those cases, we don't do any takedowns, but we show the verdict here. And then there's logos detected, which shows how many logos our deep learning model identified on these sites. And there are other parts of the platform where you can actually dig deeper into these links and see where were the logos, what did they look like, what was the screenshot, what was the takedown that we did on that. And all of the information is part of the platform as well. And on the right, you see more information like where is the country, where the site is hosted, who is the hosting provider, and other information. We are a small startup, but we have very large customers. Our customers span into multiple different verticals, from communications to transport to tech startups and other kinds of large companies. So you can see some of the customers. I talked about Zoom, but we also have customers in other verticals. With that, I would like to thank you all for attending the webinar, and we'll take any questions that you may have.
Well, very good, Shashi. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your presentation. And a reminder to attendees, if you've not submitted questions yet, you still have time to. You can do it via the chat window on your screen. We likely won't be able to get to every question today, but for those that we can get to in the course of this session, we'll get responses back to you via email. That said, Shashi, I've got some questions. Are you ready?
Yep.
Here's the first one. How does Bolster's AI keep up with the changing tactics that scammers use?
That's a great question, and thank you for that. So the way we've designed our machine learning models is they're continuously learning from the different kinds of attacks we see. We have a way where we can sort of, if there is a new variant of attack, we can easily put that into our training system. Since it is continuously training and deploying the models, we can easily put them out into training, and in a matter of hours they would be deployed and start detecting these new kinds of variants of scammers tactics.
Shashi, what's the setup and deployment involved to start discovering and taking down sites?
So if your organization has some presence on the internet, we actually do not need much to start scanning the internet to find infringements of your brand, because there are multiple sources that we're already getting data from on the internet. Things like any domain that's being registered is public information. You can get that. You can also get things like domains registering for SSL certificates. We have partnership with spam trap providers, so we get all of this information automatically through on the internet. So we don't need much to start finding external infringements of your brand. And so there's no setup as such. All we need is information and maybe some assets, like if you're a new brand that we are not monitoring already. In our database, by the way, we already have more than 1,000 brands that we're monitoring. So if you're not one of those 1,000, then we may have to train on your information, like your logos and website, which takes a few hours. But other than that, there is no setup and deployment as such, which keeps it fairly easy for us to get started with your brand.
Now, here's an interesting question. Does Bolster take down sites that are discovered somewhere else? For example, what if our security researchers find sites that Bolster has not found? Can you take those sites down?
Yes, absolutely. I think if any site that you find that's infringing on your brand, there are ways to integrate with our platform. So the part of the platform that I showed only had the dashboard, but there are other components to it where, for example, you can use the API to send any links that you're finding on your end. And if our system detects automatically that there is a infringement in the form of phishing or other kinds of scam, then we would take care of the takedown, and that part is automated, like I said. So you would not have to do anything after that. After the submission, we would take care of the entire workflow.
A pricing question for you. How does Bolster price its takedown service, and do you offer a discount for higher volumes?
So we are not priced based on per takedown. I think that's somewhat of a has been the norm in the past, but with other vendors. But we don't do based on per takedown. We have a subscription-based model where because of the automation we've built, we can actually take down as many sites as we find, and there's no cost overhead that you have to bear for new sites that are coming up. So if there's a spike, let's say in one of the weeks of a month, you don't have to worry about it. We'll take care of that in the existing package.
One last question, it might be the biggest one I have. How is Bolster able to take down sites so quickly?
So there has been quite a bit of strategy around it that we have developed over the last few years. One critical piece of that is partnership with some of these large hosting providers. We actually have partnership with some famous registries, registrars, hosting providers, where they've given us, because of the quality of the detection we do, they've given us access through APIs to take down some of these bad sites that are hosted on their infrastructure. It solves this problem for both the parties, because for us, we take down the site, and for them, they're also cleaning up stuff that is on the infrastructure, which is undesirable, right? And because they operate at scale, something like this really helps them as well. So that's one way of doing things in a very fast and effective way through APIs. The second way where we've built reputation over time is just reaching out automatically to the hosting providers to their abuse contacts or email addresses. But that also requires you to have no false positives, because if you're sending fake or false takedown notices, the hosting providers will basically stop taking you seriously. So it's important that, and it's a critical piece of the workflow, that you detect things extremely accurately, and that's where our AI models supersede all the previous efforts on this, and we basically have very high accuracy in detection, and so the takedowns that we send are also high quality. So over time, this reputation has helped us reduce the turnaround time on takedown, because people trust our verdicts.
Very good, Shashi. A pleasure to work on this webinar with you. Thanks so much for your presentation and for taking time to answer these questions also.
Thank you very much for your time. Thanks. Bye.
Of course, I want to thank our attendees. You took time out of your day to attend this session. We're grateful for that, certainly. I trust that Shashi was able to give you some data points, some perspective to enable your organization to be even better prepared to detect and respond to these phishing and typosquatting attacks that he talked about here today. I do look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming sessions. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for attending today.